Hi, I'm Sara.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode titled Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sara. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about 1960s Sunrise at Campobello.
It's Politics Month. We'll also be doing Death of Stalin in there.
He
And
was not an American president, was he?
he was not. We're also doing Parnell, Clark Gable's worst movie, and we'll be doing Kingfish about Huey Long, starring John Goodman. I am so happy to be talking about a film today that depicts people who make me feel good about the USA.
Indeed. Can you give us the trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of and/or references to prohibition, government officials breaking the law, polio, ableism, bad teeth, World War II, the Great Depression, politics, Irish people, mothers-in-law from hell, wasps, extreme wasps, waspy wasps from Waspville, nepotism, smoke and mirrors, alcoholism, addiction, sad childhoods, cigarettes, hammy child actors, and adultery.
It's a wild list for a movie this clean cut, but all true. Rena, can you also give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include Franklin D. Roosevelt, A Political Life by Robert Dallek, Eleanor Roosevelt, Volume 1 by Blanche Wyson Cook, The Roosevelt Women by Betty Boyd Caroli, The Man He Became, How FDR Defied Polio to Win the Presidency. That's a spoiler alert for you, by James Tobin. Hissing Cousins, The Lifelong Rivalry of Eleanor Roosevelt and Alice Roosevelt Longworth by Mark Pizer and Timothy Dwyer. Eleanor by David Michaelis, and also the podcast Totalis Rankium episodes on FDR. I read the internet, get my background on this movie.
This movie is pretty forgotten. There was one point when I went on a bit of a dive where I thought, I know that Eleanor Roosevelt consulted on this, and I went searching through various biographies, and it said nothing about the making of this film. It did say that this film has unfairly tainted the memory of Sara Delano Roosevelt because it needs to have a bad guy, and she's a mother-in-law.
There's been bad ones, there's been good ones.
I've always said that the way that you know that the Bible is meant to be taken metaphorically is that the Book of Ruth is a story about a woman who really liked her mother-in-law. Whither thou goest, I will go. No woman ever said that to her mother-in-law, ever. And that's how we know the Bible is meant to be taken figuratively.
That is fascinating because I don't think I knew that quote was about a mother-in-law.
Sara, I am so happy to be talking about the Roosevelts. There aren't enough movies about either of the presidents Roosevelt or Roosevelts in general, and this movie doesn't do them justice, but we'll try our best to do it ourselves. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born on January 30th, 1882, and died on April 12th, 1945. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt was born on October 11th, 1884, and died on November 7th, 1962. They were married on March 17th of 1905, and in between all that, yes, Sara.
I have a question. Are they related?
Yes, they are fifth cousins, so they are not Habsburgs.
Okay. I wanted to address that because I noticed her name was duplicative, and so figured we might as well get that out of the way.
Yes, Roosevelt is both her maiden name and her married name. In between all of that, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of our greatest presidents, I think possibly the greatest president of the 20th century. And Eleanor was one of our greatest first ladies and one of the most admired women in American history. They set a standard for building a civilized social safety net and a gentler, well-regulated, more humane capitalism, and for passing legislation that actually helps people. And FDR's record has been unparalleled to this day between the New Deal lifting America out of the Great Depression, the Glass-Steagall bill protecting our investments for a couple generations at least, and saving us from Hitler. And he owes props to Winston Churchill on that too. But in terms of his record on making America a more secure place to live, LBJ tried to help with the Civil Rights Bill and the Great Society, but his loss of popularity due to the Vietnam War prevented him from going further. And then we got stuck with Nixon. Obama tried, but he was stymied by a recalcitrant Congress. And FDR is amazing. I love him, and I love the Roosevelt family in general. And Eleanor is someone who gives light to people around her and in turn brings out the light in them. And she took a lot of flack from people. I once read a biography of Eleanor that devoted pages to why her family didn't fix her teeth. So, as I've said, they are the waspiest of wasps from Waspville. Franklin's family are the Hyde Park Roosevelts. Eleanor's family are the Oyster Bay Roosevelts. Whose childhood do you want to hear about first, Sarah?
I want to hear about Eleanor's.
Members of her side of the family said Franklin is 9/10 mush and 1/10 Eleanor. The Oyster Bay Roosevelt's nickname for Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, they said FD stood for feather duster because they thought he was an intellectual lightweight.
Can you imagine betting against FDR?
I cannot. Eleanor's father is President Teddy Roosevelt's younger brother, Elliot. And Elliot Roosevelt is a raging alcoholic. And it's kind of heartbreaking. She loves him with all her heart, though. Her mother thinks Eleanor is ugly and addresses her as Granny for her serious demeanor. And her father does things like leave her at the door of his gentleman's club with dogs for hours until eventually the doorman takes her home. And Uncle Teddy wants Elliot committed. Roosevelt's keep trying to fix him. It's just sad. And Teddy is constantly furious at Elliot, not just for being an alcoholic, but for being an adulterer. Like, as far as he's concerned, Elliot's alcoholism is a weakness, but he deserves to go to hell for being an adulterer. And then when Elliot finally dies, TR apparently sobbed like a baby.
I'm sure that was very difficult.
He said that when he saw the body, it was like 15 years had fallen off of it, and he was reacting to, he had just been seeing this thing walking around in his brother's skin, horrifying everyone for years. So Eleanor is an awkward child. She's brilliant, but just describing, I think, how she perceived herself. This is from the book Hissing Cousins, which is about her relationship with Teddy's daughter, Alice. Alice is not in this movie, but Alice and Eleanor should be a season of feud. And I've started thinking that I must be going soft in my old age because normally I'm Team Alice. Since Alice thinks Eleanor is this goody two-shoes. And, normally I always identify with whoever the dark one was, but over the years, Alice is like gratuitously whack to Eleanor. But speaking about what was baby Eleanor Roosevelt like? So when her grandmother lets her out of their gloomy house to be around her cousins, this is from the book Hissing Cousins. It was also the only social occasion where the budding teen could mingle with kids her own age, and she hated it. Trapped in gothic seclusion by her grandmother, Eleanor knew more about the love life of the romantic poets than she did about acting like a teenager. The clothes, the jargon, the latest dances, it was all lost on her. One year, she showed up wearing the same blue dress as the year before, now several inches too short. Another time, she wore long black stockings and a white organdy dress that stopped above the knee, giving her a whatever happened to baby Jane look.
I was going to say, up until the point where she was not interested at all in fashion, I think that this woman is like your kinsman.
Her cousin, Corinne Alsop, explains, no one, young or old, wore very short skirts in those days, even for sports. But her grandmother bought her a dress that could have been for a 5-year-old, said Corinne Alsop. She was, said Augusta Tilney, a friend of Corinne's, a living freak.
That's really shitty. All of that makes me feel terrible.
So eventually she's set off to school in London where she blossoms. Unfortunately, I do remember the reasons why her family didn't fix her teeth, even though that should be the least important thing about her. And it was because getting your teeth fixed and people examining you for your appearance, that's for showgirls. Eleanor is a Roosevelt. She will find a husband for her blue blood and her good breeding. People aren't supposed to look at her in her mouth like she's a horse. So orthodontia was in its infancy, but also she was too high class to get her teeth fixed under the standards of the time.
Orthodontia was for whores.
Yeah, that's basically how her family would have felt about it. She was supposed to be valued for being a Roosevelt, not for her teeth.
It sounds like her own family didn't value her for being a Roosevelt, though.
Uncle Teddy loved her, and this is possibly the root of Alice's resentment at her, because Teddy's first wife dies, and Teddy's mom died the day Alice is born, and then looking at the baby gives him too much pain, so he doesn't see her really until she's a little kid. So Alice resents being shafted like this. She wonders whether her dad ever loved her mother, and then Alice has a stepmother to deal with. And what I want to do is just like shake her and say, Alice, at least you have a dad. Eleanor's parents are both gone before she's a teenager. Her mother dies of diphtheria, and her father dies of alcoholism.
And her parents were both shitty to her.
Elliot keeps saying, I love you, we're going to be together when the family lets me again, and writing her these letters, and it's the standard thing where someone in his condition cannot follow through on any of their promises. So eventually the cousins meet. FDR has an unremarkable student record at Harvard. He says that the hardest blow of his life was being rejected from the Porcellian Club at Harvard. The Porcellian Club is, well, Teddy Roosevelt had been a member, but back about 7 years ago when Harvard was trying to get rid of gender-specific clubs, the head of the Porcellian Club said, making the clubs gender neutral is a bad idea because more women are going to get raped. It's not good for women.
I don't have the time to unpack the wrongness of that comment.
That is the club that rejected FDR, and he remembered this as one of the greatest blows of his life, despite being accepted into Hasty Pudding and a number of other societies and being editor-in-chief of the Harvard Crimson. He doesn't spend much time in class because he's busy with his extracurriculars. This goes to the nickname Feather Duster. I would just love to be a fly on the wall at that meeting where FDR is blackballed. And it was probably just that some guy said, yeah, I don't like Franklin Roosevelt. FDR and Eleanor fall in love. His mother thinks they're too young. Sara Delano Roosevelt is going to be the mother-in-law from hell. She designs adjoining houses for them, where, of course, she has an entry so she can pop in anytime she wants. And she wants to pick all the furniture. She's poor Eleanor, who she's quite overbearing to, lost her mother as a little girl and sends her these sad letters saying, like, hope someday you can love me even a little.
That is so unacceptable. Years of Everybody Loves Raymond, the show, is predicated on the nightmare of having your in-laws live too close.
Eleanor, being the president's niece, is offered a White House wedding. She turns them down, and this is another thing that makes cousin Alice jealous, because Alice wanted to be the first Roosevelt girl married out of the White House. But the stories of how Teddy upstages the bride and groom at Eleanor and Franklin's wedding are a hoot. So Uncle Teddy had just been inaugurated. The lame duck period used to be longer. The wedding date was chosen around that March 17th was the St. Patrick's Day parade, which he was going to march in because it used to be okay for the president to march in the St. Patrick's Day parade. And the idea is that the parade route goes past the church downtown where Eleanor and Franklin are being married. So Teddy can step out of the parade and into the wedding to give the bride away. He does this, and then the guests all skip the receiving line to follow Uncle Teddy into the library to listen to him opine on subjects because the president is here. So Eleanor and Franklin are left standing in the receiving line with nobody greeting them.
I can appreciate where it's hard to be a wedding guest as the president of the United States.
Yeah, that was a day when he lived up to that saying about him that he needed to be the bride at every wedding, the baby at every christening, and the corpse at every funeral, which I thought was from Mark Twain, but it's actually something his daughter Alice said. Eleanor has 6 pregnancies, 5 children survive infancy, and then Franklin cheats on her with a woman named Lucy Mercer. Eleanor finds the letters. Eleanor offers Franklin his freedom, and then Sara says, we are not having a divorce in the family. I am cutting you off if you get a divorce, Franklin. So it's open for debate whether how much connection he had to Lucy Mercer after that time. It said that the Roosevelts stopped being a couple in the physical sense after this, but I don't believe that he didn't for the rest of his life. So minus Eleanor, FDR seems like kind of a lightweight up until he gets polio, which we see in this. He had been a member of the New York State Assembly, and then he had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson, a position previously held by Uncle Teddy. I would say Eleanor is the substance behind him to a big degree. And could Eleanor achieve power on her own today? I doubt it, because people still hate on women for the same reasons they were cruel to Eleanor back then. She'd be one more example of a brilliantly accomplished woman who creates one more story of, this is why we can't have nice things.
I agree with you on this. She absolutely could not achieve power today. She's smart. She uses her own mind. She cares about people. She's not pretty enough. She's progressive. Like, all that our current political situation would do is make AI videos of opposing leadership dumping poop on her and being like, look, she's ugly and now she's covered in shit and we win. Because everything's garbage. And just, I was going to say you're not getting me on a good week, but really, like, you're getting me on the tail end of a bad year. So I don't have a lot of patience for the world that we are living in right now. But anyway, she's the best.
She really is. Sunrise at Campobello takes place in the summer of 1921 when FDR gets polio. He had been doing a little bit of work on Wall Street because his party is out of power. He's thinking about future political runs. He's also just been called back to Washington for some very stressful hearings about a situation in Newport where young members of the Navy were being used to tempt people into homosexual acts so that they could then get them in trouble. I don't want to go into this, but FDR is under a great deal of stress from these hearings.
Wow, the Navy running honey trap operations.
But as usual, when I should be writing a nice, succinct bio with a beginning, a middle, and an end that touches on the important events in their lives, I become drawn to tangents and details outside the main story. And this is one of a few situational conflicting reasons why we sometimes have Sara read from Wikipedia. Not because I didn't do my research, but because I felt too much in love with my research. So I will be commenting over the course of the film on the background behind FDR's polio, how he contracted it, what made it worse. James Tobin chronicles it in such a fascinating way that you feel in suspense about microbes. So after the film, of course, Franklin Roosevelt goes on to become governor of New York and then to become one of our greatest presidents. But This is focused on a narrow portion of the Roosevelts' lives. Sara, can you please tell us, since Teddy Roosevelt loves to upstage things and make them about him, and we love him anyway, can you please tell us why you think that Eleanor's Uncle Teddy is our hottest president ever?
TR really captures the magic of being a man's man without being a toxic monster and is very ahead of his time with that. I love that he was considered so politically dangerous that they shunted him off to being the vice president under McKinley because that was the role in which he would have the least power. And then, Shulgash decides to shoot McKinley because he's standing and shaking hands in a line of people at the Pan American exhibition in Buffalo. Thank you, Stephen Sondheim. And then TR becomes president, and he's a crusader for decency and is secure enough in his masculinity to fight against massive corporations, to fight for workers, to love nature. Teddy gave us the national parks. He's just kind of a dreamboat. Like, he's a righteous dreamboat. I love this whole family because they're all like kind of a little weird and completely dedicated to making the world a better place. And this is absolutely me being in a parasocial relationship with a dead man. I am convinced that should he decide to, he would allow me to call him out for mansplaining. And as a bonus, he built my absolute favorite place on the planet Earth, which is the Museum of Natural History in New York City.
TR is a wife guy. It's one of the things that we love about him. And we're leaving this in, even though this movie is about his niece and his fifth cousin, because there really aren't movies at the feature film length about Teddy Roosevelt, which is a crime and a shame. So this could be the only time we get to talk about him. While we're on TR, let me tell you about how rotten his daughter Alice it was to Eleanor, which is chronicled in the book Hissing Cousins. Alice is so nasty to Eleanor. When FDR is cheating on ER with Lucy Mercer, Alice invites Franklin and Lucy to parties at her place, society parties as a couple.
That's so bitchy. Based on what you were describing in terms of their enmity, it also seems like her problem isn't really with Eleanor. Her problem is with her father.
She thinks that Eleanor is this hopeless, like, goody two-shoes and resents her. So this is something that Alice wrote about Eleanor being a goody two-shoes. So bitchy Alice writes, "By the age of 15, I knew quite a bit from the Bible and from my rabbits and guinea pigs. Living in the country as I did, you take those things for granted. My parents wouldn't admit that the Bible was a good place to learn the facts of life, but I did just that. However, when I tried to pass some of the information on to my cousin Eleanor, I almost came to grief. She suddenly leapt on me and tried to sit on my head and smother me with a pillow, saying I was being blasphemous. So I shut up, and I think she probably went to her wedding, not knowing anything about the subject at all. It was that kind of difference between us from the start."
Not to take us down another wormhole, but I just want to put this question out there. Where in the Bible is the reproductive science?
Where it says that someone knew their wife and where it says that you're not supposed to spill your seed outside the woman's body. She had
Right?
guinea pigs.
That's not really comprehensive reproductive health education, though.
And all Eleanor wants to do is help people. This is completely one-sided. If you said, oh, you guys are rivals, there's a feud. Eleanor didn't do anything. Alice is probably like, everyone loves my ugly cousin Eleanor all the time. I hate that bitch. I'm going to make her cry. I'm going to invite her husband and his mistress to parties at my house where I'm super witty and everyone in Washington remarks on how clever I am. Eleanor just wants to help people. It's sickening. I hate how everyone loves her, especially Daddy.
You're very angry about this, and you are acting up a storm over there, and I'm here for it.
I'm sure that wasn't Alice's manner at all. She's just
I'm
being such a little bitch.
I'm not convinced that it wasn't.
And bear in mind, Uncle Teddy is not in this movie. Cousin Alice is not even mentioned.
They're like the good Kennedys.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if we're going to worship a political dynasty in this country, like, it should be the Roosevelts.
Sara, can you please tell us a little bit about the 1960 film Sunrise at Campobello? This
Sure.
may be our last journey to that stacked landmark year in film that was 1960 and to that year's fascinating Academy Awards.
Yeah, this is definitely a movie that sits on the old Hollywood side of that Academy Awards. So Sunrise at Campobello was originally a Broadway play, and it was written by a man who redefines prolific based on my read on him, Isidore Shari, known as Dor Shari. He did time at all the studios throughout his career, writing and producing movies. He was discovered by William Wanger, who you may remember from our Cleopatra episode.
Oh,
He is the
yes.
one who shot Jennings Lang in the dick, maybe, because he was being cuckolded. He wrote so many movies. He was a man on a mission in terms of film that put him at odds with the leadership of the studios in the 30s and 40s. He said that films must provoke thought in addition to entertainment. They must educate and inform as they entertain.
If you've ever seen Sunset Boulevard, when William Holden says that thing to Betty about, "You're one of those message kids, aren't you?" Dory Sherry is what he's talking about. And I guess he was brought in to head up MGM in 1951 because MGM felt that they needed someone to be the new Irving Thalberg, and he didn't quite fit that role. His subsequent career as a playwright after being fired from that job is an instance of there being a second act in someone's professional career, but it's a mystery to me how having a playwright with such a strong background in film could lead to such a stagey movie being made from his play.
I'm utterly unsurprised by how stagey this feels. I glanced through his filmography. I wasn't familiar with a lot of the movies because there was a lot of filler movies in there and B movies. This is a guy who nobody's missing a lunch hour working on his set. Nobody's getting overtime pay. Ralph Bellamy, who plays FDR in this film, originally played the role of FDR on Broadway. I know him best from Trading Places. So every time like I hear him talk, all I'm hearing is Mortimer and Randolph. He and Donna Michi play these two miserable old men in that movie. The play was a hit, so they made it into a movie, as they used to do with these things, is kind of the story of this movie. And I'll get into awards talk later, but I also wanted to just share a couple of other interesting facts about Dorr. Notably, he was an outspoken opponent of the House Un-Americans Activity Committee. And in 1948, he was honored by the Anti-Defamation League for distinguished contributions toward enrichment of America's democratic legacy alongside Eleanor Roosevelt and Daryl Zanuck. In the midst of this career, he served as the national chairman of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith from 1963 until 1969. He was named acting chairman again later when someone died. He has been, he's worked a lot, but is not a super famous name. Although curiously, actor Josh Paez, who, if you watch a lot of Law and Order, you will know him as someone who was a bee in Mariska Hargitay's bonnet until it was found out that he had child porn. He plays Dorr in I Saw the Light, Hank Williams Sr.'s biopic, which I have a lot of questions about. Like, how does that happen is pretty much the big question.
We will get to that one again because it stars Tom Hiddleston, who I think is one of the handsomest men alive. I have seen that movie because it stars Tom Hiddleston, and it unfortunately lives up to, there is a critic who wrote, "This is the paint by numbers music biopic that Dewey Cox warned us about."
So does he have a brother who gets cut in half real bad?
He has a bad back.
Okay, I see where that's going. This movie was directed by a man named Vincent Donahue, and Vincent was primarily a stage director, and it really shows here. And I should also mention, too, that Ralph Bellamy played FDR again in the miniseries The Winds of War in the 80s. That's based on the Herman Wouk book. And also, just another interesting piece of trivia, Edward Herman has played FDR several times. He played him in Annie and in 2 television miniseries about the Roosevelts. It just made me think about like when Daniel Day-Lewis was saying what a hard time he had stepping out of the role of Lincoln because he loved being in his world. I feel like being in FDR's world would be delightful as well for an actor. And I'm wondering if it was one of those things where they really enjoyed going back to it. Also, our old friend Bosley Crowder of the New York Times loved this movie and called it a well done, moving biographical film. Long.
I saw Missy LeHand in the trailer, and I thought, remind me which of them was sleeping with her, Eleanor or Franklin. Eleanor does have history with women later on. But I would say that Sunrise at Campobello is the late 50s version of Oscar-bation, but it's done in this charming old Hollywood way where I feel some affection rather than cynicism. I think the best scenes in this movie are the ones that have no dialogue, where you see Ralph Bellamy's purely physical acting as FDR learning to live with disability. Any scene with Hume Croyne is good so long as his character isn't telling jokes, because he's supposed to be comic relief, but he does these German and Irish accents, and they aren't funny. This movie is 2.5 hours long, and I could cut it to 90 so easily, and it would be better, and I wouldn't miss a thing.
Yeah, this movie is definitely the product of another time. It reminded me a lot of, I was a communication student in college, and I did take some classes that maybe weren't the most studious of classes. Like I took a class in television comedy. And one of the things we saw as we went through the history of sitcoms was that the pace of things changed so dramatically from when things launched. You'd watch an episode of Father Knows Best and it would linger on the wife's face for like 10 seconds. I felt that in this movie. It was just like slow. And it wasn't slow in a sloppy way. It was just like slow moving and lingering. Literally took the play and put it in a movie set, which is not a good way to adapt a play to a
No.
movie.
And I'll go over things here that I think are just a waste of time that they put in to this movie. So we open on swelling old Hollywood music and a sailboat over a sparkling Technicolor bay. At this point in his life, FDR is coming off 6 mostly successful years as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and an unsuccessful run for Vice President in 1920, but FDR was so key as president when he did become president that for the first time ever, I'm going to say, thank God Harding won. And we see that FDR is a vigorous man in the prime of his life.
Indeed. The acting is also stagey, too. Everyone's kind of playing to a theater that doesn't exist.
And we hear those plummy accents, and it's a specific kind of accent that doesn't really exist anymore. But we know they talked that way because we have recordings.
Yes, I feel like kind of nail a lot of the affectations. Almost to a point of parody. But this is also a hard movie to adjudicate because I'm coming at it from a very cynical place of 2025, where the way we watch and absorb movies is different.
Something like this is to 1960 what like Merchant Ivory is to the 90s. It's something that you make to be a prestige picture.
Yes.
It is true that they did go sailing that day, and they did put out brush fires on a little island near Campobello that day, and that Franklin did sit around reading the mail in his wet bathing suit.
I'm going to ask a medical question. Is
I'm
sitting
not a
around
doctor.
You're closer to it. You're closer to a doctor than I will ever be.
How am I closer to being a doctor?
You didn't just describe the class you took on television comedy in which you watched episodes of Father Knows Best for education. So is sitting in a wet bathing suit for too long, is that how people get polio?
No. From David Michaelis's biography of Eleanor, he notes FDR's likeliest source of infection had come through contaminated drinking water at the Bear Mountain Scout Jamboree. Depletion of his immune system, dating back through 2 decades of severe chronic infections ranging from sinusitis to typhoid fever, on top of the stress of overwork and the public crisis of Senate Inquisition, had likely rendered him that much more susceptible.
Okay.
It was something in the water, not the wet swimsuit or the swim.
Picking up paralyzing disease at a Boy Scout camp event seems conceivable. If you have ever been to a Boy Scout camp, it is just a scooch above Lord of the Flies at those places.
Okay. So his family calls in Dr. Keene, and Dr. Keene is a man they bring in who misdiagnoses the polio as a blood clot and prescribes massage, which is also a mistake. He was 84 years old and had previously operated on President Grover Cleveland one time when Grover Cleveland had a tumor on his jaw and no one could know that the president had to have surgery on his jaw, so they smuggled Dr. Keene onto a boat to do surgery on the president. But this is decades earlier. I want to call him a senile quack, but he is America's first brain surgeon, and he was probably just past his prime and not a specialist in infectious diseases. Dr. Keene charged the Roosevelts for his misdiagnosis. On his initial visit, he charged them $600 in 1921 money, or about $10,000 in 2025.
Not surprising that they would come to care about making sure that people could access healthcare if that's how much it costs to get a good doctor and to misdiagnose you in 1921.
It's well, and that's just the one visit.
Yeah.
So over the period of his house visits, this doctor charges the Roosevelts $8,000.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Outside of like the hanging out too long in our swimsuit, we have a family dinner, and I shouldn't rag on any actors ever, but these child actors in this film are the worst.
They're very hammy child actors giving an aw shucks performance. Every minute with them is tiresome. And if this is what kids were like back then, I can see the origins of children being seen and not heard, because they are kind of cute. Every time they open their mouths, they ruin the scene. And it's this idealized version of the Roosevelts' family life.
Everyone's just so loud in this movie. We're seeing like them wrestling, and we know that American political dynasties love horseplay.
They're already setting up Hume Cronin's character, Louis Howe, with the kids complaining about him, is one of the great American character actors, and we last saw him together as the lawyer in The Postman Always Rings Twice.
Indeed. And we also saw him in Cleopatra, and he has never looked young.
No.
How dare you asshole children complain about a man who is a national treasure? There's a lot of Von Trapp energy in this family too. Like, I feel like the kids are dressed kind of like Von Trapps. Everyone's always wearing sailor outfits or sailor adjacent wear.
I think that's how upper class kids dress in that time.
And it does feel like they are also always on the verge of breaking out into song. But instead, they go to retire to the parlor to read aloud from Julius Caesar.
And oh boy, am I glad that we don't have to watch any of this. I'm glad that Franklin got sick with polio and went to bed early so that we wouldn't have to watch the Roosevelts do this production of Julius Caesar. The kids don't want to read from Julius Caesar because they don't like Franklin's casting decisions. And FDR asks for a hard drink, and Eleanor urges him to change out of his wet swimsuit. He complains that he feels tired and that that's the first swim in years that didn't refresh him.
Dun, dun, dun. He's name dropping to make sure that we're set in the place of other presidents. And he mentions that Harding, who was a noted monster and corrupt AF, liked to play the tuba, which that tracks. Of course he did. And he has a line here that I really liked, which was, "It is only once in a generation that a people can be lifted above material things. That's why conservative government is in the saddle 2/3 of the time." That is a quote from Woodrow Wilson, America's most well-intentioned racist president. And I just want to clarify that it was well intentioned, but ultimately he was still a condescending, wild racist. Even though Woodrow Wilson is observed as a progressive, he is pretty racist. And this comment also made me like, what kind of plagues do we need? Or America needed like the plagues of Egypt to elect a progressive in FDR.
And to let him carry through on what he said he was
Yeah.
going to do. We're watching a movie about a good president, and I am going to stay as positive as I can, given that the movie has not aged well. And these don't look like Greer Garson's teeth, but they don't look like Eleanor Roosevelt's either. I normally find prosthetics less unnerving than the actor not looking like who they're supposed to be, but prosthetics were not great 65 years ago.
I couldn't get a beat on the teeth situation here because it looked like those could have been prosthetics. This also looked like it could have been a really bad cap job that she chose. So I don't know. There's also too many people in this family. There's just too many of them.
But for once, they got the number of kids right. They just needed to make them non-speaking roles.
Yes, yes. And also we really don't engage with more than like 1.5 of the children.
But when we do, we regret it because it's a bore, so why keep making that mistake? Their daughter, Anna, is a brat throughout the movie, so we see her throwing a tantrum while her father is sick about letting her decide when it's time to eat lunch, and I think Eleanor should just send her to live with Alice.
Jesus, what an asshole this kid is.
We have an expository conversation between FDR and Eleanor. There are many expository conversations throughout this film because not only is it stagey, it acts like it doesn't have a film's budget to show, not tell.
They make sure we understand what everybody's feeling at any given time. So it's exhausting and excessive, and some of this could have been compressed. Some of it could have been cut. This is Sunrise at Campobello. It is not Hamlet, which is also a play that should be cut sometimes.
Well, and Sunrise at Campobello hasn't been revived a bunch. So as a play too, it's probably super dated.
Oh, God, yes.
And we need more stuff about the Roosevelts. There are generations now that don't have that sentimental attachment to those accents and that big old lantern jaw with the grin holding the cigarette holder between the teeth, and there should be. We should remember him the way we remember Lincoln.
Yes. And maybe someday we will, when we realize all the good things that he did and how we don't have them anymore.
Yeah, FDR is assigning parts, and of course he gives himself Mark Antony the role with the best speech. But thankfully, we do not have to see the family reading of Julius Caesar. We see that FDR has collapsed. So FDR goes upstairs, and later on, Eleanor gets out of bed, and we see that FDR has collapsed on the floor after calling out for Eleanor, and Eleanor helps him back into the bed. We move forward a bit, and FDR is having trouble lifting a spoon, and enter campaign strategist Louis Howe. There's some major bromance going on here. Howe massages Franklin's leg medically. I'm going to read to you something about Louis Howe from Robert Dallek. So the man here is Louis McHenry Howe. an Albany journalist with an unmatched reputation for political savvy. The two first met when Howe, who shared Franklin's progressive bias, interviewed the novice senator for the Empire State Democracy, and they took an immediate liking to each other. And Howe is described as pint-sized, emaciated, he weighed under 100 pounds, and pockmarked. Howe was known as the Gnome of Albany, and, as he liked to think of himself, a slayer of political giants. He prided himself on his distinction as one of the 4 ugliest men in the city. No one ever identified the other 3, and one observer considered his appearance beyond comparison in off-putting looks. It wasn't just his physical attributes that offended anyone who studied him, it was also his cultivated slovenliness, as he would typically be dressed in unpressed baggy pants and food-stained jackets, shirts, and ties. He was a chain smoker, and his nicotine-stained hands attested to his constant tobacco use.
I mean, yeah, that's gross.
They've set Howe up for a good entry. He amuses FDR with various foreign accents throughout the film and is never funny when doing so.
From the playwriting 101 context, he's the supporting character who's kind of the foil to keep things light. But yikes. I did ask what the deal is between the two of them because of the intimate medical massage. I know that there are all sorts of wild sexual agreements going on amongst the Roosevelts, but sounds like they were just buds.
Howe does have a wife, and she's rather annoyed at him because he spends all his time with the Roosevelts.
I mean, he's never home. He's always at the Roosevelt's house.
Yeah, and he even mentions that, it's so odd that he chooses to spend an evening with Mrs. Howe. This is a few years after the Lucy Mercer situation. So the disease is described as infantile paralysis. Infantile paralysis is one of the names for polio.
And then enter Sara Broad from stage right. She's loud and bossy, and she's coming in to steal her scenes.
Sara Delano Roosevelt is formidable. She's a grande dame, and her hats and Louis Vuitton trunks are among my favorite things about this movie. So FDR is her only child. Her husband was twice her age, and he was a mama's boy.
I can tell. I mean, she doesn't go in there and do the massage herself, but she's got funny energy from Sex and the City, where I'm like, you don't seem to have good boundaries. This is all very theatery as we're working out the mechanics of how do we get him to New York so he can get treatment, blah, 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 and everyone's very loudly playing it.
There is a scene between Aw Shucks Jimmy and Hal, and bless Hume Croynan for elevating every scene he's in, even with the stagey dialogue. I doubt that even Val Kilmer could elevate these child actors. And is there any line more wholesome than, "I just got up for a glass of milk, mother"? Howe has respect for people like, I'm just going to call her SDR instead of Sara, for people who don't give him the same respect. And also that Garson and Bellamy are playing people who at the time would have been universally familiar.
That is kind of wild to think about. This is basically if someone decided to make a movie about the Obamas right now.
It's 36 years after, so we're not quite there yet.
But FDR had just died in 1945, and they had left office in 1945. So it's it's 15 years after that.
We're finding out that FDR is not going to regain full use of everything. And we have, remember Trope Navajo from the Doors episode?
Oh, I do.
Our old mascot. We kind of have a Trope Navajo moment where SDR is the trope of the unsupportive parent who doesn't get it, kind of like Mrs. Gehrig in Pride of the Yankees. Because it's been a while since we mentioned Trope Navajo, can you explain to our listeners who he is?
Trope Navajo was the beyond obvious symbolic Native American who was always in the fringes of Jim Morrison's life experience after he and his family drove by a auto accident where they saw some dead Native Americans. Rather than that being implied in any way in that movie, he's just literally there. It's the loudest, tropiest angel of death that's ever been. And as I said at the time, we have made this entire world of people suffer since the day we stepped foot in this country. And then we add that particular insult of the doors to it, and not great.
Because being stuck inside the head of Jim Morrison and Trope Navajo kind of shows up whenever Jim is sort of like in the zone. So
Yeah,
anyway, just because it's been a while since we mentioned him, and Trope Navajo used to come up so much on this show, and we are now 70 odd episodes in. How overhears every rotten thing that SDR has said about him, and he just
it's
walks right on in.
yeah, it's wild. And everyone's kind of like, how do we deal with the fact that he is ruined and his whole life is ruined now because he has polio? And he's just talking about, like, I want to get well enough so I can go to business meetings and conferences and overhaul the Democratic Party, which is all just, the casual stuff you do after you've been hospitalized for a minute. There's
Sure.
a there's a great moment here, though, that I loved where Missy is talking to Howe about what is actually possible for
Mm-hmm.
FDR, and he tells her, like, believe. He believes that he's going to be okay, so you have to believe it too.
Yeah.
Um,
So, as a publicist, what's your assessment of how?
he seems quite capable at his job, and I can't overstate how much I love to see publicists who are capable and not evil, because it doesn't seem like those two things ever happen in movies. They're either profoundly stupid or they are monsters. And if not straight up the villain, definitely an antagonist. So it was like nice to see someone just really being great at the job, and also being a friend to him, as well as someone who sees his potential professionally. I really liked this portrayal of someone who's in the image management business, who also is very mindful of his subjects humanity and frailty.
Oh, yeah. I'm happy for you that you got to see a positively portrayed publicist.
Yeah, it's not typical. They create this whole charade to get him on the train to go back to New York. And we see, like, the first of many masterminding moments of Howe and the family being in on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking about too, while we were watching this, like, all the political subterfuge that they did in order to protect him. How many close calls were there over the years?
Yeah.
Those have to be some great stories.
Yeah, because FDR, he goes from saying, I want to dispense with braces or crutches or to just like that he wants to at least be able to practice subterfuge. Like at one point he's really happy where he figures out that if he just like props himself up in a standing position against a wall, he can shake hands with people. So someone's going to have to engineer getting him into that room, propping him against the wall so that he doesn't fall down, and having the arrangement at whatever party it is come out just so that everyone just happens to go to greet him. And also, like, this is a time where, since he doesn't want people to know that he's disabled, but for example, you're supposed to stand up when a lady enters the room.
So they get back to New York, they pull it off. They will pull it off hundreds of other times.
Right. You see him like beaming from the train and smiling and looking like the picture of health. And he makes sure that Eleanor switches him to his good hat. And of course, SDR she's like, I don't think the children should see their father carried out on a stretcher. Like, she just doesn't want to deal with reality. And she's making everything harder because she's a mother in law. We may as well drop this out here now. Spoiler. At no point in Sunrise over Campobello do we see a sunrise. We
No.
see sunsets, we see people commenting on sunsets. We do not see a sunrise, which I'm fine with because I think that morning is a beastly rotten time when absolutely nobody should ever have to be awake ever. And one of the happiest periods of my life was the semester of college when I arranged my schedule so that I would never have to wake up before noon.
I mean, I feel similarly about sunrises. It's an overrated
Oh
experience.
yeah,
Uh,
every time that life placed requirements on me to be awake at a time where I'd see the sunrise, I look at it and I think overrated.
but
Like sunsets are always magnificent, sunrises are not worth seeing.
and usually I'm like, I'm really tired. Um,
We have a scene of hospital rehab where Jimmy Roosevelt is being aw shucks again, and FDR shows off his lifting skills.
he's learning to get around and work around this condition.
Hmm.
And yeah, we're talking about Teapot Dome, like back in the day when you could shame a Republican. Like those were great times. He also has moments of being really irritable.
Hmm.
Um, but then also like it never goes too deep though.
Yeah, there's a scene of him being irritable at Missy about mistakes that she's made, but it seems like this woman was such just a bang up executive assistant. The costumes for the most part thoughtfully reflect that moment between the World War I post-Edwardian era and the war with the Roaring Twenties kicking in. We have a sentimental monologue, again, very stagey dialogue about the first few days of his journey that leads to you must learn to crawl before you can walk. And I'm gagging here and I just want to be an editor, and it's supposed to be inspiring stuff, but it's this expository conversation and I can't with it.
Without getting too deeply into this, I know he sounds like everyone thought he was like a nothing. Was he an egotistical mess? Like did he have to learn humility?
I think it's terrible to say this about something that causes disability, but I think that having a struggle him a soul and empathy and fortitude.
I
um
don't I don't think that that's a bad thing to say. You take away from life experiences what you take away from them, and the fact that he took away a determination to be more empathetic and to be a stronger leader and to care for other people in a different way. That's okay to say.
Well, there's a scene later on where he's taught himself to crawl up the stairs, and you see he's so proud of himself that he's found a way to be independently mobile on stairs, but the people watching him are about to cry because to him it's him reclaiming dignity, to them it looks humiliating. So Anna throws another tantrum, this time about how getting her room, and of course, Granny put her up to it.
I like loved her look in this scene. But again, like what a whiny little bitch.
She really is. They're just terrible child actors. So Howe has been putting items in the paper because he's a good publicist. Eleanor is nervous about giving speeches, and giggling during a speech was a problem that the great ER actually had.
It's funny to see her expressing any anxiety about this just because of what a confident leader and eyes and ears for him and legs and arms she would become. We'd burn her at the stake in 2025. But, you know,
Then we have another pointless scene about the dirigible salesman. This dirigible salesman guy is pacing the floor in shoes that squeak loudly, and throughout there's no point in his scene in Mr. Brimmer and his dirigibles. There were a lot of people coming to FDR for money while he was prone and not able to quickly get away from them. FDR was determined to cover his medical expenses himself, even though Sara had offered to pay for everything. At the time of their marriage in 1905, the Roosevelts have a combined income of $12,500 per year from their what we would call trust funds. And I guess having a Manhattan doctor who made what sounds like multiple house calls per week, plus two full-time nurses who specialized in massage and physical therapy on staff, got to be quite expensive. So at one point, Franklin suggested letting the two nurses go and having Eleanor do all the work despite her complete lack of any training in orthopedic nursing.
How dare you, sir?
And later admitted this was a terrible idea because Eleanor was already extended to the breaking point here. And one of the pioneering PTs that he worked with was a woman named Wilhelmina Wright. Also, like, how and history agreed with me that there is no point to Brimmer and his blimps, because that is what a dirigible is. I remember the Hindenburg at one point, they were up there with airplanes and it was going to be a major form of like mass transit. Originally, the top of the Empire State Building was supposed to be a place to dock dirigibles coming into New York.
I mean, all it took was that one accident. It was pretty bad, let's be real. But
yeah.
um,
So
I wonder if they had to do like a set change or something like that, and that's why they wrote that part.
even if that's the case in the play, it definitely should have been
No.
cut here. There's so much stuff that they could cut, like about like FDR's silly like business decisions. Eleanor is having a hard time of it. And this is something that actually happened, that she was reading a book to the younger boys and just burst into tears. The storybook that Eleanor is reading to the kids is super boring and leaves me feeling sorry for them and like, get the fuck out of here with the merry old shoemaker and the blue shoes and Wednesdays. I would cry too if dumb stories like this were what I had to read to my children. And the book looks very beat up, so it looks like Eleanor had to read this really dumb story about the shoemaker to her children a lot. But this is something that actually happened. And I feel like Greer Garson cries quite a bit in this movie.
Yeah, Eleanor needs to cut herself some slack. She's under a lot of stress.
Yeah, I would like to recast this movie with Jo Van Fleet as Eleanor.
I find that a very interesting choice.
Jo Van Fleet is just the bomb.
This movie needs someone to come in and be like, let's cut. I guess because it's a play, there is like a first draft energy to this.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I didn't seek anybody's input after I did my revisions and then put on a play. There's a quality to it where it could be shorter and streamlined and still have the same impact. There's, more horseplay. We see that he's getting really good at rolling around in that wheelchair.
Again, like Bellamy's physical acting in this is very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, also Greer Garson is, of course, any actress at the time who's a big enough deal to get cast is going to be a major case of U 2.0 on Eleanor Roosevelt. And this is like sitting through a school play. And what I'd been hoping was that I would find this forgotten old Hollywood answer to Lincoln. And we have another scene about FDR's lack of business prowess that we didn't need. We have two dramatic readings of the poem Invictus that I couldn't stand. Also, more expository conversations about things that everyone involved would have already been familiar with. Like, the Roosevelts have an expository conversation about things they already know, and no couple has ever had a conversation like this ever. And the exposition is stagey and clumsily handled. It's a groaner. It makes me want to gag. And Anna is a brat again, but she's about to be cured.
Like, Anna, just get your shit together and learn how to put books on a bookcase, or toughen up and learn to deal with criticism. And then her mom tells her, you have to apologize to him. And then she goes in and he tells her a story.
The story he's telling is actually this old Jewish folktale that I'm not going to recount here. And I think that the playwright probably knew this story from childhood, because in the real version of this story, the wise old man, it's a rabbi.
It makes sense that there is a rabbi-sized hole in this story.
Yeah.
As it is told in this, because it's like, who's the wise old man? Of course, it's the rabbi.
Yeah, and the Roosevelts are wasps. I don't think they would have known this story unless it pops up in wasp culture. But in that case, it doesn't make sense just to have like wise old man. And yeah, the word rabbi is missing.
It's essentially a story, the message of which is you should deliberately make your life shittier so that when you take away that shittiness, it will look better than it did before you did that. So, I mean, good message.
In the original version of the story, after telling the family to move all of the livestock into the house with them, the rabbi tells them, do you have any poor relations? Invite them to come live with you. Oh, yeah, I have a note here. How are there still 50 plus minutes left in this movie? We have a scene of Eleanor making a speech to show that she's getting the hang of things.
She is doing better. And then we have more random poetry reciting to each other. And we have another family dinner.
And I wanted this movie to be comfort food. It's not what I wanted it to be. It's not
Like,
what my 2025 Forsaken Soul was hoping it would get.
there's more SDR and FDR, like, fighting about what he can do and what he can't do. She's, like, trying to warn him not to, like, burn the candle at both ends because that's what Teddy did, and he burnt out trying to help people and serve the people, and it killed him.
I want better movies about the Roosevelts. I want this movie rewritten by Dustin Lance Black or Tony Kushner. SDR is showing serious signs of Munchausen, and we have a confrontation between her and FDR where she wants to have the dumbwaiter at Hyde Park turned into an electric elevator for him.
That math isn't math in there.
No.
Like, is he gonna, like, squeeze like, okay.
Yeah, so the dumbwaiter is this, it's this thing, it's a lift in the wall that servants would use to send food from the kitchen up to the dining room so that people employing them wouldn't have to see their staff members who worked in the kitchen. I do love how he says rusticating, and the story she tells him about Grover Cleveland saying, "I hope you never have to be president, little boy," is true. Right, and they also have a confrontation about the concept of noblesse oblige, which seriously, I would settle for noblesse oblige these days. And after this intense discussion, issues with Mrs. Roosevelt Sr. are resolved. Hooray. And we
Yeah.
see FDR trying to get onto the crutches. So the face that Ralph Bellamy makes here while trying to get onto the crutches reminds me of that face that men make during sex that I refer to as the stretched turtle face. I call it the stretched turtle face because it looks like if you took a turtle and then pull back the sides of their face. One of the great social equalizers in our unfair world is that all men, no matter how handsome they are, look stupid when making the stretched turtle face. It's impossible not to look stupid while making the stretched turtle face, and it's hard not to ruin the sex by bursting out laughing at how stupid men look when they're making this face and just how ridiculous that face looks. Because at this point, the woman has invoked Margaret Atwood's line about how men are afraid that women will laugh at them and women are afraid that men will kill them.
Mhm. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So at this point, Ralph Bellamy falls on the floor, and I feel like I must be a bad person because, once again, I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing at the stretched turtle face.
Yes, he's straining.
And throughout the rest of the movie, they've been pretty good about giving us dates in the captions, but they're not giving us a caption with the date to tell us we're in 1924. I actually had to clarify this, that it's 1924 and not 1928, which makes me feel kind of dumb. Like,
Well,
because,
it's
well, right, because I guess to people at the time, FDR making the Happy Warrior speech at the 24 convention it's the thing that launches him the way that there is not a red, a blue, there is not a white America or a black America. There is the United States of America keynote launches Obama in '04, and everyone's going to remember it. 1924 is where FDR launches his star, making this nomination speech.
I feel like people just would run for president over and over and over up until, like, relatively recent times.
Yeah, so this guy McAdoo that they're talking about is Woodrow Wilson's son-in-law, and he is best buds with the KKK. Al Smith is the first Catholic to run for president on a major party ticket. He opposes prohibition, and he's this legendary governor of New York, and a lot of the programs that FDR eventually carried out in Washington were originally carried out by Al Smith in New York State. And I am proud to say that my grandma Henrietta refused to date men who voted for Hoover in 1932.
She was right to do that.
Also, if you want to learn more about Al Smith, Ken Burns does a great segment on him in that New York documentary that he did about 25 years ago.
Ken Burns did a really great 3-episode thing on prohibition a few years back, and there's a great segment of that about Al Smith and about the race of 1928 and what it represented. How we were so close to repealing prohibition, but it was like a proto red state blue state kind of election, where that battle between the people in the cities and the people in the country was the 1928 elections. And I mean, and also he was a Catholic, and I mean, I know what my problems are with Catholicism. I don't always understand what the rest of the world's are, but I think it sounds like they sort of think of them as cultish.
Yeah,
Here, but
at one point in his 28 campaign, Al Smith made a beautiful speech against bigotry at people who just weren't going to get it. So there's some talk about Smith having FDR make the big keynote nomination speech at the convention. And I guess that defense of Catholics running for president that FDR does quite eloquently, it's coming in the spotlight of JFK running. When Liam McEnany was on here, he said that biopics are also about the time that they're being made in. And Al Smith describes FDR is appealing to the Protestant drive rural vote. Eleanor is off to make another speech and full of confidence. We have some exposition around FDR needing to walk to the podium to make the speech. Al Smith gets an endorsement from Babe Ruth. I would love to go the entire rest of my life without ever once again hearing a celebrity's political opinion.
I am not even sure that Babe Ruth could read. I wouldn't bet my life on that right at this moment.
I feel so. Just like hearing people say progressive positively in this movie makes my heart sing. I feel like you can't do that anymore in a movie without apologizing or explaining yourself. And I'm glad Smith hates the Klan. There's mention of the League of Nations that were a dud. There's some guy named Burt Cochran who's supposed to give the speech, but
Died.
yeah, he's dead. So we're confronting that FDR can stand to give the speech, but it'll have to be on crutches. And he's telling Al Smith this. And Smith, you see him thinking about it for a moment, and then he asks FDR anyway.
So also rolling through my head, I did mention that Edward Herrmann played the role of FDR in Annie. And because I was a musical theater kid and I have been in more than one community production of Annie in my day, all I had in my head throughout this entire movie was we'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover.
Sarah, do you want to sing Hooverville now?
Of course I want to sing Hooverville.
Sarah, go ahead.
Today we're living in a shanty. Today we're scrounging for a meal. Today I'm stealing coal for fires. Who knew I could steal? I used to winter in the tropics. I spent my summers at the shore. I used to throw away the paper. We don't anymore. We'd like to thank you, Herbert Hoover, for really showing us the way. Thank you.
Yeah,
but
we
yeah,
specialize
I had that
in unplanned musical moments on this show.
the line they offered us, Al Smith and Hoover, was just over and over in my head as I watched.
Right, although this is about 1924, not 1928, because in 28, FDR runs for governor of New York. So he has to walk 10 steps, making it look like he's not disabled. And it's not fair. It's not fair that his ability to hide his disability is more important than his ideas or his capacity for leadership. His family is getting ready to go to the convention for the nominating speech, and oh good, Mama Roosevelt Sr. is now supportive, issues resolved, hooray. There's some discussion about where to use the phrase happy warrior in a speech that, yeah, would have been familiar to audiences in 1960. The Madison Square Garden that they're supposed to be at is the Madison Square Garden designed by Stanford White that was about to be torn down. At this point, I looked at the countdown and I realized with gratitude in my heart that we fortunately do not have to watch FDR's entire half-hour nominating speech.
I'm surprised,
But I had a
honestly.
sense that it might feel like it. Until the Landmarks Preservation Act, which is one of my favorite laws ever, we had no way of preserving things. So Stanford White's MSG had gotten old and run down, and this was one of the last things that happened at the space. But right before that, one of the other last things was the Barnum and Bailey Circus, so it smelled like elephants.
Stanford White also brings up another musical.
It's time for the crutch walk. And we see Eleanor knitting nervously, which she does repeatedly in the film, and I get it. And I like that they show that Eleanor was a knitter.
Yes, we are a pro-knitting podcast. Someone makes a joke about the Postal Service, and we have clearly stayed consistent in our country in our respect that we show to the USPS.
Yeah, he does.
But he pulls it off, and everyone's happy. And today the Republicans would boo and mock and throw trash at him.
Of course they would.
Yeah, and be like, look at how stupid he looked because he can't walk. Yeah. This is like the 5th convention we've been to on this show.
What other
and they're all
conventions
boring.
have we been to?
I mean, we've been to, let's see, we were at the 64 convention with LBJ. We were at the 72 convention with Shirley.
Right.
Yeah, I don't care for conventions.
Right. Really white crowd here, which given the Dixiecrats is accurate. The only black delegates at major party conventions that year or for a while after were at the Republican convention, because at this point in history, the Republicans are the party of Lincoln. Progressive Republican and liberal Republican are not oxymorons. And the black vote in places where black people can vote is almost completely Republican and will remain so until the civil rights movement takes off. Jackie Robinson was a Republican until Goldwater. FDR steps to the podium and, oh good, we don't have to watch. At this point, I decided that it would behoove me to read up on Eleanor's role in this admitted hagiography. I checked several biographies and could find nothing. We know that Eleanor is there in an advisory capacity, so my guess is that there isn't much documentation, or rather that nobody bothers to write about any documentation of her role in this because the movie is so dated and forgotten. And can we please get a better movie about the Roosevelts? Can we please get a dozen better movies about the Roosevelts? There are so many real and fascinating aspects to their stories that we can tell truthfully now that we couldn't in 1960.
This is almost good, and I can see why it was good then, and I understand why I don't find it good now. It's just could have been days shorter. That's our movie, and it's a great close off, and we know that the sunrise was metaphorical, and it was the friends we met along the way.
Yeah, because we still have not seen a sunrise at Campobello in Sunrise at Campobello.
Yeah.
So we have awards talk this week, Sarah.
We do indeed have awards talk.
This is quite probably our last visit to the 1960 Oscars season. It's bittersweet. We love talking about the 33rd Academy Awards. We previously talked about this landmark year in film in our episodes about Trumbo, The Alamo, and Spartacus. where we lovingly discuss different angles on that particular year in filmmaking and the politics around that year's Oscars. This is, of course, the year that Dalton Trumbo officially breaks the blacklist and is locked out for Best Screenplay thanks to the lingering effects of the Red Scare, while the two films that he wrote, Exodus and Spartacus, are unjustly locked out of Best Picture, with the big epic slot going to John Wayne's nigh unwatchable The Alamo, which I think is one of the reasons why 1961 is one of the few times that the actual Best Picture of the year won Best Picture. In this case, Billy Wilder's The Apartment. If Spartacus or Exodus had been able to get that slot that John Wayne and his politics took, they would have beaten The Apartment, because Academy voters will always pick an epic over a comedy.
In my hot take opinion, Spartacus was the best movie of that year. It's certainly the most meaningful, like in the bigger picture sense of things, like in terms of like being a representation of the time. So yeah, this was nominated for a bunch of awards. As I mentioned, it was a big Tony winner, and Ralph Bellamy won the Tony for FDR. And we had nominated for this Best Actress Greer Garson, Best Art Direction in Color, and Best Costume Design, and Best Sound. So nominees all, no wins, but that's okay. We appreciate this movie, but we didn't like it.
So for choice dialogue, I have something that Al Smith says about picking FDR as a campaign manager, which is, I don't need an acrobat. And something FDR says, which is, I love to dot the I's and cross the T's. Same, pal.
I go back to So Missy Believe.
That's a good one, too, but a lot of that is in Cronin's delivery. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
I'd be happy to, Rena. So we rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to issues in biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes there. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
All right, Sarah, do you want to go first on the scores?
Sure thing. Okay. For outward appearances, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, an 8. Passage of time, 5. Costuming, 6. Quality of the script, 6. Accuracy, 7. Storytelling, was it cliched, interesting, inventive, 5. Production value, 8. Direction, decision making, 5. And do we care? 8.
Wow. I was bad cop this week just because I expected a lot from this movie. So what does your average come to?
My total came to 6.7.
Okay, so for outward appearances, makeup and hair, I gave it a 7. For acting and casting, I gave it a 7. For passage of time, I gave it a 5 because they don't tell us that we're in 1924. For costuming, I gave it a 7. For quality of the script, I gave it a 5. For accuracy, I gave it a 6. For storytelling, I gave it a 4. For production value, I gave it a 7. For production, direction, decision making, I gave it a 5. And for do we care, I gave it a 5 because I did care, but not this telling. Did I expect too much? My average came to 5.8. Sunrise at Campobello, your combined score comes to 6.25. You did not earn second opinion.
I can't even imagine who would review this. The only people who would review this are the people who are also afraid of computers. What I think is that 1960 was a really interesting year for movies, and we have swung for the fences and seen the best and the worst of what that year had to offer. So I feel like I kind of went into this expecting it to be something more innovative and interesting than it was, just by virtue of how we've talked about that year.
Mm-hmm.
And this felt like this felt like a holdover from a different time, which I guess is its own representation of I wasn't expecting to be as bored as I was, and I was expecting it to be more of, like, a real movie, which it
Mhm.
wasn't.
Yeah, it is a holdover. I'm wondering if Eva Marie Saint and Gene Simmons are closed out for Best Actress too, just because of the pro-HUAC vendetta against anything by Dalton Trumbo. Although two of his, Best Supporting, he gets two guys in.
Yes, and the
Um,
winner, the
and
rightful winner.
is Peter Ustinov, obviously a magical creature.
Yes, high expectations are the thief of joy. Is that a saying? It should be.
So other stuff that you should watch instead, like I read so many great books about the Roosevelts for this. James Tubin, where he talks about like the where he focuses in specifically on the polio. Blanche Wiesen-Cook's book, Betty Boyd Caroli's book, Robert Dalek's were all excellent. There are so many really wonderful books about the Roosevelts, and also the Hissing Cousins one, where you can learn about, again, paging Ryan Murphy, this needs to be a season of Feud. And also that Ken Burns documentary about New York, the episodes that talk about Al Smith.
I can't recommend this movie, even though
No.
I gave it higher marks than I probably should have. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not particularly good. I can recommend the Ken Burns series on the Prohibition and the Dust Bowl. I can recommend Annie. The original Broadway soundtrack is amazing, as you've just gotten a taste of.
I have something, Hume Crinan's brief but glorious appearance as the lawyer in Postman Always Rings
Oh,
Twice.
yeah. See Postman Always Rings Twice if you ever have the opportunity to. I'm still reading The Power Broker. It's pretty great.
Yeah. Oh, Robert Caro's multi-volume biography on LBJ, also excellent. Don't know if he's ever going to finish that. Robert Caro has been writing about Lyndon Johnson since before we were born.
He apparently, I've heard, he wants to go to Vietnam for one part of the book that he needs to write yet, and he hasn't been able to do that.
You can buy a ticket to Vietnam. It's there. You can buy them online now.
Yeah, there, and you know what else I know from my copious viewing of court TV is that Vietnam is a non-extradition country. So if you need to get away, Vietnam is a good place to look at. If you want to watch a Ralph Bellamy movie that folds up and is really fun, watch Trading Places.
I need to watch that.
It's so great. It is a Christmas movie in my house because it does take place at Christmas.
Amazing. Sarah, can you please take us out?
I'd be happy to. A couple of things before we go. Our podcast baby has matured, and we've launched a Patreon. Just an effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you. Platform hosting, recording, equipment, research. Sometimes we have to pay for movie rentals, and sometimes we want to see a movie in the theaters, or we may actually want to see each other in person, and we pay for transits. So we're offering shout outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. We'd love to thank Brandon and Gates, who are our Patreon patrons already. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon and Gates.
If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @BioPickPodcastStory. Do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. And please check out our webpage at biopickapodcaststory.podbean.com to see official episode ratings of all the movies that we've done so far. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. And our theme music is by Ben Patch. The intro is his song Slater Cannonball, and the outro is Spring Breakers. And you can check them out on Spotify.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about the death of Stalin. This one has been depressing to research because I hate totalitarianism and I hate communists. I hate dictators, and I really fucking hate anyone who is down with the whole property is theft thing. So fuck Joe Stalin, and I will feel gratified to watch him die on screen. Fuck this guy. It's like I just kept wanting to read more about Roosevelt's. I didn't want to read about Stalin because it's terrible. He kills tens of millions of people in the name of the revolution. So this week we did a sort of dull movie about wonderful people that I love to read about, but next week we are doing a scintillating movie about terrible people that I don't enjoy reading about.
It's going to be fun.
Good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night, Rena.
Good night, Sarah.